This is Jerry Kassar, the chairman of the New York State Conservative Party, welcoming you to our podcast, Patriots Podium. Our show brings newsmakers, conservative political leaders, political pundits, and conservative thinkers to you for an informal conversation on their work and the issues of the day. Today, we are joined by Nicole Kiprilov, who more than most has worked in all areas the show looks to highlight. She is here in her capacity as the executive director of the Border Story, but I suspect she is known to our audience for the many hats she wears or has worn. Nicole, a native New Yorker, worked or has worked for the City Council, the New York Legislature, the United States House leadership, and important legislative and communications roles. In fact, over the years, I would say we've interacted at a number of different times on a number of different type of political activities. So having you on the show is especially exciting, I think, for me and the Conservative Party. And you're a regular cable and print news contributor. You're the founder of Sagamore Hill Strategies, the president of the Coalition for Military Excellence, and you're a fellow at the Independent Women's Forum and the Club for Growth. But otherwise, you're not that busy, I guess. Let me ask you this. Welcome to the show. Let's talk a little bit about what you're about, and what your organization is about, and what brings you to us.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman. It's an absolute honor to be on your show. I know we've interacted many times over the years, and I'm like you said, native New Yorker, have been involved in New York politics and government for so many years, and one of my biggest priorities has always been fighting for New York, and ensuring that the American dream in New York, the American dream that my parents actually made happen right in front of my eyes, as they're immigrants from Eastern Europe, and they made their American dream happen in New York, ensuring that that is kept alive for many years to come.
Well, they do say if you want to get something done, you find a busy person, and I guess you might be the busiest person we've ever had on this podcast. But let me ask you this: how do you actually time manage yourself? How are you able to juggle all these different items? It's a little off the track of what we're going to talk about on the show, but I think it would be of interest to the audience because you have successfully juggled a lot of different responsibilities.
Well, look, it's certainly very tough. I think time management has always been difficult for me, and it's certainly still a work in progress. But I think there are a few things that I have learned over the years. First, there is no perfect balance. I almost never get everything I want to get done in a day. And that's why prioritization is key, even though that I think is an extra challenge because I'm someone who wants to do everything and thinks everything is important. But over the years, I think I've begrudgingly learned to just let the less important things go. I also will say, and this is something I've really thought about for many years. There are no perfect conditions for being productive. I think oftentimes people wait for motivation to hit them to get the work done. But motivation is so transient. It's, unreliable. Same thing with willpower. So I think the key is to train yourself to do tasks regardless of how you're feeling or how motivated you are. And usually that's when the momentum starts building. That's when the motivation comes. And then lastly, I think, when you believe, and you know this better than anyone, when you believe in what you're doing, that feeling of working on something you believe in gives you so much energy. I think, everything I do is, I do a lot of different things, but I think it's connected by one mission, which is, like I said in the introduction, fighting for the country that gave my family the American dream. And realizing also that a lot of that work, which I know, of course, as well, it gets done behind the scenes. It's not glamorous. Others may not see it, and it may not be social media worthy, but that's what makes impact, and not too many people want to do that kind of behind the scenes work. The door knocking on political campaigns, for example, the late night phone calls, and all the work that gets done that most people don't know you're doing. So I think, if you really believe in what you're doing, that kind of work becomes not easier, but you just get more energy to do it. And then I think lastly, you can't do everything yourself. Building a strong team is critical. And I've been very fortunate in the American Border Story and at pretty much every work environment I've had to be surrounded by amazing, incredible people who are just as passionate about the work I do. And I learn from them every single day.
Well, I mean, it's clear that you're a believer, and you're a part of a group of younger conservatives and young conservatives that I pride myself in hoping to assist as they move up and keep fresh and moving the conservative movement in this nation. Conservative movement is much bigger than any individual, as you've indicated. It's about organizations and organizing, and it can be as simple as being about telling stories like the American border story uses storytelling, investigative reporting, and really the larger media to bring the impact of America's border crisis to the general American public in relatable terms. We hear a lot of stories, but stories that the average American can understand and appreciate. There has been limited communications in that area. Could you provide our audience with some more details on who created the organization, how it functions, and how you go about engaging in your mission?
So about a year and a half ago, we created this small initiative called. It was really like an immigration messaging initiative. It wasn't yet a full-scale organization, and the purpose of the initiative was to support the Trump administration in their messaging on illegal immigration. But as we started, meeting angel families and talking to some of these victims, I think that really opened a whole new world to what the human cost of illegal immigration and some of these failed policies really is. And that's when we started thinking about turning that initiative into a huge organization, because we got connected to over 200 angel families over the past year. I didn't even know that there were so many victims out there, and that these victims of the border crisis were being ignored. We've been hearing, I think, endless discussions about immigration policy, but, to your point, almost no discussion was about the Americans who paid the price, these stories, right? Because every statistic has a face. Every number, when you hear numbers about how many illegals have come into this country and how many crimes have been committed, each one of those numbers has a family behind it, an American family who has been impacted. So our mission is to make sure that America sees those faces and hears those stories. And we use storytelling because of exactly what you said, which is that it's relatable. It moves hearts in a way that statistics never can. And so at this point, a year and a half later into this initiative, which is now actually 3 organizations under the umbrella of the American Border Story, we've been working with hundreds of these angel families and fentanyl families as well, because obviously fentanyl has a direct connection to open borders. We help families tell their stories through media. We produce documentaries. We do a lot of events. For example, the National Angel Family Day event that the president held in February. We coordinated that with President Trump's team, and we brought over 100 angel family members to that. We coordinate congressional hearings. We focus on educational programming. We work directly with policymakers, with law enforcement. And it's an honor to work with all of these families. And it's also gut wrenching when you see just how many victims there are out there.
Could you tell us a story, something that your organization would be using to help communicate with the general public? We're aware of some of the truly tragic major media stories, but I suspect, like you said, there are hundreds of serious but more ordinary conversations going on. Maybe you could talk to us a little about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many of them, but it's hard. It's hard to choose a couple. But one that comes to mind, we just actually filmed a documentary with this family in California, and we're finalizing that before releasing it. There are two teenagers, 19 years old, Anya Varfolomeev and Nikolai Asokin, from California. They were dating, and they were killed in Orange County while driving together when an unlicensed illegal alien from Mexico slammed into their vehicle. And he was going at about 100 miles an hour. He was intoxicated. He had been drugged up. And get this, he had 3 prior felony convictions. So he had served time in jail. He had been previously deported. Not only did he unlawfully enter the United States, but he was previously deported. He had an additional criminal record. He was clearly breaking the law additionally, not just being in this country illegally, but you have all of these issues stacked up. And then the result of that is that he slammed into their car. The car burst into flames. And if you look at, I mean, we saw pictures of the car, and it's just, your heart sinks when you look at this, right? They were, I mean, immediately dead, and the bodies had to be identified through medical records, and that, it's hard to talk about, because not only did that family have to go through the unimaginable, but on top of that, what ensued after was an entire systemic failure of the investigative process, as well as the process which is part of the process to attain some sort of justice. The illegal alien was released after serving 3.5 years in prison. And there's so much more to that story, but that happened in California, which is a sanctuary state. And, these ridiculous failed policies have created an environment where not only does something like this happen in the first place, right, where you have federal and state government working to incentivize tragedies like this, but then there's no justice for the family once it happens. The family is left to navigate the process of the investigative process afterwards entirely alone, because those stories, like Anya and Nikolai's story, is politically inconvenient for someone like Gavin Newsom. This happened on his watch in California.
Well, I would imagine that in the states that are right now doing workarounds to keep ICE out are true sanctuary states and cities. We see this gigantic pushback on what the Trump administration is successfully doing. But I would guess in general in the country, we have seen a pretty big difference from the Biden to Trump administrations as it involves open borders. I mean, I personally would not say that the U.S. is an open border country anymore, but I would say that we are kind of like a Swiss cheese situation when you have states that are sanctuary states that border for foreign countries, like California or New York, for that matter. You all, I guess, are working with these distinctions, I suppose, in a way. Even though I know you're a non-political, you're a not-for-profit, you're dealing with this sanctuary city anti-ICE attitude all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we started a C4 as well, so that we could engage in political activity, and so that we could call out these sanctuary jurisdictions. We have a legislative division as well, and we're specifically focused on states like California, Illinois, New York, states that I think, conservatives and Republicans have been unwilling to really tackle. I mean, the work that you're doing in New York is not, unfortunately, it's not widespread across the country. I wish there were more people like you and your effort in these blue states where we have so many of these victims. But I do want to make a point, because you mentioned how we're not an open border country anymore. And that's absolutely true. And it's all because of new leadership. Under Biden, we experienced the largest illegal immigration crisis in American history. I mean, 10 to 15 million at least illegal aliens being let in those 4 years. And to your point, one of the most remarkable things that we've witnessed is just how quickly that crisis has changed once leadership changed, once policy changed. We were told, if you remember, for 4 years, oh, we can't do anything without this bipartisan bill. We can't do anything without it. It's all Trump's fault. He's trying to get it not to pass. But then within weeks of a new administration, crossings collapsed. Border Patrol apprehensions fell by 95%. The numbers are just staggering, right?
What do you think? I mean, so much of this is common sense. What happened? Why did what I considered many common sense Democrats disappear essentially from the battlefield, and we got stuck with progressive? And I can use progressive and ignorant as interchangeable words in this conversation. How did we end up with so many ignorant elected officials that would put their own constituents in their own states at such great risk? I mean, and it's kind of a rhetorical type question, but you would think that you didn't need a leader at the level of President Trump to straighten all this out. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. How did we go so astray?
It's a tough question. I think it's because the Democrat Party strayed further and further from common sense, as you said, and now it's plagued by this moral and spiritual crisis. I think at the root of it, it's a moral and spiritual crisis, because I think Democrats largely, right, it's no longer a party of common sense. It's a far left extremist Marxist Mamdani type party.
I am finding in New York State, you have to get down almost to the county legislative or village level before you find Democrats that actually think on their own. I mean, it is a conglomeration of something out of a Star Wars movie, where there's one brain that is pulling the strings of everybody underneath, and it is actually it's actually a real major problem. You want to feel like you're talking to people who understand that things have to change, and you realize all they're doing is looking for cover. And that's why I also think that your group, Border Stories, would be so important to cause normal Americans to understand that they're not alone when they have to deal with. I mean, in New York City, you can count the number of elected officials that make any sense, and the rest kind of just. I mean, they're either in the Mamdani camp, which is socialist, or the progressive camp, or the socialist democratic camp. You don't find any working class, blue collar Democrats. Possibly it's going back a long time, but possibly in the Reagan mold anymore. And I find to be a very deep hole that we've driven into, and very difficult to climb out of. But let me ask you this: you've alluded to the drugs earlier, and that is obviously one of the problems at the border, and with the fentanyl which remains a gigantic problem in the United States, is that many of these crossings are really just covers for groups that are being paid to smuggle people in, but they're actually smuggling in other things such as drugs or even terrorism. Those are border stories that Americans do not want to grapple with. Yet at the same time, they allow their government to push back at ICE and other methods that would help control this problem in a state like New York. How big is your organization? How fast is it growing? And how much are you able to get into um, the frame of mind in states, kind of like a Turning Point has gotten into the frame of mind of a lot of Americans in some states?
Yeah, so I mean, what you're talking about, it's a whole scale problem that has produced various types of victims. So you have the Americans who've been murdered by illegal immigration directly, but then you also have the fentanyl family. So when you ask how big is our organization, we have probably over 100 fentanyl families who have been victims, and we don't call it overdoses, we call it poisonings, because that's exactly what it is. Fentanyl is not manufactured in this country. You have precursor chemicals that are coming from China. With the help of Mexico, they're being manufactured and then brought through the border, not just the southern border, but the northern border as well. That's why President Trump put so much pressure on Canada to crack down on drug smuggling there, because fentanyl was pouring through our southern and northern borders, and it reached the victims of fentanyl deaths reached the highest level within 2 years, within actually less than 2 years of the Biden administration. That was the highest level it has ever been in the history of this country under the Biden administration. That is absolutely the fentanyl poisonings, all these communities, that is absolutely, those are victims of open borders. Then you mentioned human trafficking, cartel exploitation, sexual assault. We have, children who have been abandoned during journeys. That's the irony of it, is that the left always tries to make the humanitarian argument, right? Well, we care about the illegal aliens and everyone should have a shot at the American dream, and we're the humanitarians here. Look at these families being separated, right? Although they don't want to acknowledge the families that are permanently separated and will permanently have an empty chair. The Americans will have permanently an empty chair at their dinner table for the rest of their lives. So Democrats make this humanitarian argument, but it falls flat when you consider just how many illegal aliens, right, or people trying to cross the border have died on the journey. You have people dying in deserts, being extorted by smugglers, right? So secure borders are humane borders. We've also shared stories like the stories of ranchers and farmers living in border communities. We did a documentary on Martine Wall, who is a rancher in Eagle Pass in Texas. And it's very significant because his property, his ranch, basically turned into an unauthorized highway for drug smugglers and human traffickers. He had to sleep with a gun every single night to protect his wife and child, because he would wake up in the middle of the night to the sounds of illegal aliens raiding his property and destroying his kitchen. I mean, these are
Eagle Pass in particular. Eagle Pass is one of the first examples of the Trump administration saturating an area, and the state of Texas, with the amount of security necessary to essentially stop the crossings. Remember, that's not you remember, that's not an ICE issue. That is actually a border security issue. And they turned Eagle Pass around, but the amount of resources that had to be applied there was almost ludicrous. And it's sad that the Biden administration allowed such an attitude to prevail in Mexico and in South America, that we would allow these crossings. And it's taken the Trump administration a good, now I think the foreign governments understand, it took them a long time to cause cause countries to realize we weren't playing around on something like this. That Eagle Pass was that Eagle Pass was almost like another world. It almost was not like America anymore. So I mean, I don't think most people understand that. Let me tell you this: up in Ogdensburg, New York, which is right on the St. Lawrence River, border security has a fairly large marine operation. It covers an area of approximately 200 miles, and it actually links up with an operation up at Messina and an operation that's farther down in the Buffalo area. Right, that's there, but it's still a handful of men and women covering hundreds of miles where there's an enormous amount of activity. When you get into the Midwest, northern Midwest, you actually have towns that cross the border. Now you can't just walk in and out, but they're actually the same towns. They're on both sides of the Canadian border because the Canadian border for 1,000 miles is basically an unprotected frontier, except for the possibility that you have to walk through a forest. I actually believe that prior to the Trump administration, during the Biden administration, not only did we have an open border, we had literally no idea of how bad the situation was on the Canadian border. And even now, the president cannot get the type of resources that are necessary to truly close all this off. A wall? I mean, I'm not against a wall, I'm for a wall, but a wall is just one of the things that needs to be done. And that's just, I think, how badly this laissez faire attitude by the Democrats and Biden, in my view, has created one of the across the board worst situations the United States has faced in any peacetime. And thank you for the work you do, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Biden administration created a system where illegal aliens weren't just let in, they were incentivized, they were invited to come in. And it was this comprehensive system where you had, federal resources, the CBP-1 app, for example, so many more catch and release policies being used to incentivize illegal aliens. And then the Biden administration's leadership, along with state leadership, people like Kathy Hochul, Gavin Newsom, Pritzker in Illinois. We have so many stories in Illinois. They're tragic, and we don't have time to go into all of them.
I mean, Schumer and Pelosi,
absolutely,
flick and frack. I mean, one's asleep and the other is drunk. But I mean, my basic point here is that thankfully there are organizations more and more, whether it be Young America's Foundation or your organization or American Conservative Union, it goes on, that are taking the mantle and pushing beyond what the governments can only do so much without the help of the people. And these border stories help people better understand that the problem is a lot bigger than hearing about a particular incident, the drug part in particular. But you know what? You actually do a lot more than this organization. You have a lot of things that you do. I know it's interacted. You're actually a major conservative leader who will grow into even be a bigger leader as the years go by. So I want to just ask you, I mean, you're definitely a leader in the American First movement. I like to think that all Americans understand that we should all be part of the American First movement. It almost sounds like something you should be part of. You're the president of the Coalition for Military Excellence. And we said earlier you're involved with the Club for Growth, which the party is very close to, by the way, and the Independent Women's Forum, which actually is an outstanding organization for discussions on conservative issues. And you founded Sagamore Hills Strategies, which I suspect is probably where you make your actual income. I've heard of Sagamore Hills, and I'm sure that is a big part of your life. But so you've done a great deal, and you obviously are having a fulfilling experience. What can you say to our audience, which I probably wish was a little younger, but certainly it's an opportunity for us, on how to go about getting more involved, and that, frankly, to understand that it's life is not about an Instagram post or hitting a like button on a Facebook or are trying to expand your influencing level on Twitter. How do we get a greater interest in younger people in understanding that the future really is about them?
It's a great question. I think it ties back to what we were talking about with how illegal immigration is not just a federal issue, but it's a state and local issue as well. And there are opportunities to get involved everywhere. If you're passionate about immigration, or if you're passionate about helping getting the right people elected, or any other issue, or conservative women's issues, whatever issue you're passionate about, there is always an opportunity to get involved and make a real impact. And I think young people can follow in the steps of, Charlie Kirk, who it's hard to talk about anything without bringing him up, because he was responsible for motivating so many young people to understand that their voice matters, that their work matters, and everything that you do is connected. This is why I keep my, I split my time between New York and DC. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I love being here, and I love helping the Republican and conservative political infrastructure in New York, helping to elect people like Saritha Kamadi Reddy for Attorney General, people like Bruce Blakeman for governor, to replace Hochul and her failed policies, because all of it is connected. New York Democrats, led by Governor Hochul and legislative leaders, just signed a series of measures to further limit cooperation between New York and federal immigration enforcement and ICE, basically codifying and advancing New York's sanctuary state policies, which is devastating. And that's something that Bruce Blakeman and everyone on the ticket, and your party, your team, everyone is working together to fight against it. Because at the end of
there's the government of the state of New York, and there is the people of the state of New York, and the two never really actually ever meet. It's just that sad. It's becoming that sad. Well, look, I strongly believe that your organization and organizations, represent a new phase in the conservative movement as we move forward. So many of us came up as youth through the conservative movement, but it's a totally different world, totally different set of problems. You always felt back then that there were plenty of people that would agree with you if you wanted to make the effort. Now I think you're searching a little bit in the desert to find the next oasis, and I think I understand that. But we appreciate the fact that you stay active in New York, because too many people are and I can understand this, moving to states where most of the people agree with them, but here we have to fight back. Do you have any final words for our audience, if I might ask you, Nicole?
Well, I just want to echo what you're saying, which is that New York is worth fighting for. All of these blue states across the country are worth fighting for. There are incredible people in this state who are working for preserving the values and principles that make the conservative movement so great. And I think young people should look to leaders like you and Charlie and everyone across the country who has set a precedent and example for getting involved, even on the most local level, because all of it makes an impact. And so I hope the young people will continue to feel that spirit and that energy, and will not talk about escaping from blue states like New York, but will actually stay and fight back, because we are making and can continue to make tremendous progress for the betterment of American society and the American people.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and taking the time to be with us, and for us to be able to, show to the world through this world. I'd like to say the world, but certainly show through this podcast that there are a lot of people fighting with us. I wish to thank Andrew Davis and our party's operations director, and our producer, Katie Mohan, as well as Eileen, who earlier was spending a lot of time getting this show put together, for making this podcast happen. If you enjoyed this podcast, a Patriots Podium, you should know that this is one of many that you can find at our website, cpnys.org. The podcasts are organized on our YouTube channel as a library. And there's a timely nature to even the ones from 4 or 5 years ago, because unfortunately, sometimes the problems do not go away in New York State. We do, unfortunately, sometimes have to revisit. But do visit our website for a whole host of information, including our press statements, state and federal platforms, legislative ratings, events, and other activities that we engage in throughout the state. And subscribe to our YouTube station. Once again, you've been watching Patriots Podium, and I'm the State Conservative Party Chairman, Jerry Kassar. Thank you.